What would you do if you lost everything in a single day? Your wife fighting for her life, your job gone, your home about to be taken away, and not a penny to your name? That's exactly what happened to David Rivera on what started as an ordinary Tuesday morning. But sometimes, when life hits you with everything it's got, the universe has a way of sending help from the most unexpected places. David was about to meet a stranger who would change his life forever. A man who looked like he had nothing but was hiding a secret so shocking that it would turn David's world upside down. You see, this wasn't just any homeless man sitting on that park bench. This stranger was carrying something that would save David's wife, destroy his enemies, and prove that karma is real. What David didn't know was that this mysterious man had been watching, waiting, and planning something that would make his former boss wish he had never crossed the wrong person. By the end of this story, a millionaire construction boss would lose everything he had stolen. A drunk driver would face justice for his crimes. And David Rivera would discover that sometimes the people who appear to have the least are actually the most powerful. But first, David had to survive the worst day of his life. A day that started with a phone call that would make him question everything he believed about fairness, justice, and whether good people really do get rewarded in the end. This is the story of how one act of cruelty led to the most incredible act of kindness you've ever heard, and how a man who thought he had lost everything was about to gain more than he ever dreamed possible. David Rivera had no idea that Tuesday morning would be the day his entire world collapsed. At 34, he was the kind of man who believed hard work always paid off. Every morning at 5:30, he would kiss his wife Lisa goodbye, grab his thermos of coffee, and head to the construction site where he had worked his way up from laborer to foreman over the past 8 years. The morning started like any other. David was reviewing blueprints with his crew when his phone buzzed. Lisa's name appeared on the screen. She rarely called during work hours, so he stepped away from the noise of machinery to answer. David. Her voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. Hey babe, what's wrong? You sound weird. I'm scared. I'm at the intersection of 5th and Main. There was an accident. A big one. I think I'm hurt badly. David's blood turned to ice. What do you mean hurt? Lisa, talk to me. My car. It's completely crushed. I can't feel my legs, David. I can't feel them at all. The phone slipped from David's trembling hand, clattering to the concrete. His crew stopped working, sensing something was terribly wrong. David picked up the phone with shaking fingers. Which hospital? Lisa, which hospital are they taking you to? St. Mary's. David, I'm so scared. Please hurry. The line went dead. David ran to his truck, his mind racing. Frank Morrison, his boss, shouted after him, but David couldn't hear anything over the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He had to get to Lisa. Nothing else mattered. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital should have taken 20 minutes. David made it in 12, running red lights and pushing his old pickup truck to its limits. 3 blocks from the hospital, disaster struck again. A silver SUV slammed into the back of David's truck at a red light. The impact sent his head snapping forward into the steering wheel. Blood trickled down from a cut on his forehead as he staggered out of his truck. The driver of the SUV stumbled out, reeking of alcohol even though it was barely noon. The man was young, maybe 25, with bloodshot eyes and an expensive watch that caught the sunlight. Hey man, sorry about that, the drunk driver slurred. My insurance will cover everything. No big deal, right? David wanted to scream. His truck's rear end was completely demolished. But Lisa was waiting for him at the hospital, possibly dying, and this drunk idiot was acting like it was just a minor inconvenience. Are you insane? You're drunk, David shouted. My wife is in the hospital, and you just destroyed my truck. Chill out, dude. It's just a truck. David left his destroyed vehicle on the side of the road and ran the remaining 3 blocks to the hospital. By the time he burst through the emergency room doors, his lungs were burning and sweat was pouring down his face. Lisa Rivera, he gasped to the receptionist. My wife. Car accident. Where is she? The receptionist typed quickly. Room 237. But sir, you're bleeding. You should. David was already running toward the elevator. When he found Lisa, his knees nearly gave out. She was unconscious, connected to machines that beeped and hummed around her. Her face was swollen and bruised, and her legs were immobilized under a complex frame of metal and pulleys. Dr. Patricia Williams entered the room, her expression grave. Mr. Rivera? I'm Dr. Williams. Your wife has suffered severe spinal injuries. We need to operate immediately, but I have to be honest with you. The surgery is extremely complex and expensive. Without it, she may never walk again." "How much?" David asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. $200,000. And that's just for the surgery. Recovery and physical therapy will cost significantly more. David's head spun. $200,000. He had maybe $3,000 in his checking account and another $5,000 in savings. Their health insurance would cover most of it, right? His phone rang. The caller ID showed his insurance company. "Mr. Rivera, this is Janet from Consolidated Health Insurance. I'm calling about your wife's claim." "Yes, thank God. We need the surgery approved immediately. I'm afraid there's a problem. We're denying coverage for this procedure." David's world tilted. "What do you mean denying? We've paid our premiums for 6 years. We've never missed a payment. Your wife's medical records show she visited a chiropractor 3 years ago for back pain. That constitutes a pre-existing condition related to spinal issues. The claim is denied." "That's insane. She threw out her back moving furniture. It has nothing to do with this accident." "I'm sorry, Mr. Rivera. The decision is final. You can appeal, but that process takes 60 to 90 days. The phone went dead in his hand. David stared at Lisa's unconscious form, feeling completely helpless for the first time in his life. His phone buzzed again. Frank Morrison's name appeared on the screen. "David, where the hell are you? You left the job site in the middle of a project deadline. The Hartwell project is behind schedule because of you." "Frank, my wife was in a car accident. She's in surgery. I'm at the hospital. That's not my problem. You don't just abandon a job site without permission. You're fired." "What?" "Frank, please. I've worked for you for 8 years. Lisa might never walk again. I need this job now more than ever. Should have thought about that before you left without authorization. Clear out your locker tomorrow." The line went dead. David sank into the plastic chair beside Lisa's bed. In the span of 4 hours, his wife had been critically injured, his truck had been destroyed, his insurance had abandoned him, and he had lost his job. The medical bills were piling up by the minute, and he had no way to pay for any of it. A nurse entered the room. "Mr. Rivera, we need a deposit before we can proceed with the surgery." $50,000. David looked at his credit cards. 3 of them were already maxed out from previous medical bills and household expenses. The 4th had a limit of $8,000. "I don't have $50,000. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to transfer your wife to the county hospital. They have a payment plan, but their orthopedic surgery department is limited." David knew what that meant. Lisa would get basic care, but not the specialized surgery she needed to walk again. His phone rang one more time. His landlord's name appeared on the screen. "David, your rent check bounced. I'm serving you with eviction papers. You have 30 days. Mr. Patterson, there's been a mistake. I'll get you the money. Your account has insufficient funds. This is the 2nd time this year. I can't run a business with tenants who can't pay rent." David hung up and put his head in his hands. In one day, he had lost everything. His wife was fighting for her ability to walk. He had no job, no transportation, no insurance coverage, and now no home. The machines around Lisa continued their steady beeping, each sound a reminder that time was running out. David reached into his pocket and pulled out his wedding ring. It was a simple gold band, nothing fancy, but it was all he had left of value. Maybe it would be enough for the deposit. Maybe he could sell everything they owned. Maybe there was still hope. But as he sat in that sterile hospital room, watching his wife fight for her future, David Rivera felt like the unluckiest man alive. He had no idea that his luck was about to change in the most unexpected way possible. 3 hours had passed since David's world fell apart. The hospital's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, staring at his wedding ring. The simple gold band had cost him 2 months' salary when he bought it 9 years ago. Now it might be Lisa's only chance at walking again. David couldn't bring himself to leave Lisa's side, but the nurses kept asking about the deposit. $50,000. The number felt impossible, like asking him to move a mountain with his bare hands. Finally, he forced himself to stand. He would go to every pawn shop in the city if he had to. He would beg, borrow, or sell everything he owned. There had to be a way. David walked through the hospital corridors, past families crying in waiting rooms and doctors rushing between emergencies. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go, something to do. He felt like he was moving through water, everything slow and distant. Outside the hospital, the afternoon sun was harsh against his eyes. His demolished truck was still sitting where he had abandoned it after the accident. The drunk driver was long gone, probably sleeping off his hangover while David's life crumbled around him. There was a small park across from the hospital. David had never noticed it before, but now it seemed like the only quiet place in a world that had turned chaotic. A few old oak trees provided shade over worn benches where people waited for buses or took breaks from visiting patients. David chose a bench far from the others and sat down heavily. He pulled out his phone and started searching for pawn shops, but the words blurred together on the screen. Exhaustion was setting in, mixed with a kind of panic he had never experienced before. He tried calling his brother in Phoenix, but it went straight to voicemail. His parents had passed away years ago, and Lisa's family lived paycheck to paycheck just like they did. There was nobody to turn to, nobody who could help with this kind of money. David put his head in his hands and let himself cry for the first time since the morning. Not the angry tears of frustration, but the deep, soul-crushing sobs of a man who was watching his life disappear and couldn't do anything to stop it. Rough day. David looked up, startled. A man was standing nearby, but not the kind of person you would expect to find in this neighborhood. He was maybe in his 50s, wearing clothes that looked like they had been slept in for weeks. His gray hair was matted and unwashed, and he smelled like cheap alcohol and cigarettes. A torn backpack hung from his shoulder, and his shoes were held together with duct tape. Sorry, David wiped his eyes quickly. I didn't see you there. The homeless man sat down on the other end of the bench without being invited. Up close, David could see that his face was weathered and lined, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Name's Robert, the man said, extending a dirty hand. Robert Mitchell. David hesitated, then shook the offered hand. David Rivera. You look like a man who's seen better days, David Rivera. David almost laughed at the understatement. You could say that. Robert pulled a crumpled paper bag from his backpack and took a long drink from whatever bottle was inside. Want to talk about it? Sometimes strangers are easier to talk to than people who know you. There was something in Robert's voice that didn't match his appearance. Despite looking like he had been living on the streets for months, he spoke with an odd kind of authority, like someone used to being listened to. David found himself talking. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was because this stranger had nothing to gain from his story, but the words poured out. He told Robert about Lisa's accident, about the insurance denial, about losing his job and facing eviction. He even told him about the wedding ring in his pocket and his desperate plan to pawn it. Robert listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or taking another drink from his bag. When David finished, they sat in silence for a moment. $50,000, Robert said finally. That's just the deposit. The full surgery and recovery will be 10 times that. But $50,000 gets her the surgery she needs to walk again. Yeah, if I can find it in the next few hours. Robert was quiet for a long time, staring across the street at the hospital where Lisa was fighting for her future. David was about to get up and continue his search for pawn shops when Robert spoke again. I had a son once. David looked at him, surprised by the sudden change in topic. Good kid. Smart. Had his whole life ahead of him. Robert's voice was rough with emotion. Lost him 3 months ago. Overdose. Found him in an alley not far from here. I'm sorry, David said, and meant it. Today's his birthday. Would have been 28. Robert took another drink. Been walking these streets since morning, trying to figure out why some people get to live and others don't. Why some people get happy endings and others get nothing but pain. Robert reached into his backpack and pulled out a manila envelope, thick and bulging. He stared at it for a moment, then looked at David. You know what I realized sitting here listening to your story? David shook his head. Some people are worth saving. Before David could react, Robert thrust the envelope into his hands. It was heavy, and David could feel the unmistakable shape of money inside. What is this? Open it. David's hands shook as he opened the envelope. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, more money than he had ever seen in one place. He quickly counted through the bundles. $50,000 exactly. This is insane, David whispered. I can't take this. This has to be your life savings. Take it. No, I can't. You need this money. You're living on the streets. Robert stood up abruptly. Your wife needs surgery. Take the money and save her. But what about you? How will you eat? Where will you sleep? Robert shouldered his backpack and looked down at David with an expression that was both sad and determined. I've been dead inside for 3 months, David. Today, for the first time since I lost my boy, I feel like I might be alive for something. I don't understand. You don't need to understand. You just need to take that money to the hospital and make sure your wife gets the surgery she needs. David stood up, still holding the envelope. At least tell me how to pay you back. Give me your number, or tell me where I can find you. Robert was already walking away. Some debts can't be repaid, David Rivera. Sometimes we just have to pay it forward. Wait. David called after him. Robert, wait. But when David looked around, Robert Mitchell had vanished. The park was empty except for David and the envelope full of money that would save Lisa's life. David ran in the direction Robert had gone, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Standing alone in the park, David stared at the money in his hands. $50,000 from a homeless stranger who had lost his own son. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. But Lisa was waiting for surgery, and time was running out. David ran back across the street to the hospital, clutching the envelope tightly. He burst through the emergency room doors and found the billing office. I have the deposit, he told the woman behind the desk, his voice breathless with excitement and disbelief. As he counted out the money, David couldn't stop thinking about Robert Mitchell. Who was he really? How did a homeless man come to have $50,000 in cash? And why had he given it all away to a complete stranger? David had no way of knowing that he had just met one of the most powerful men in the state, or that Robert Mitchell's act of generosity would change both of their lives forever. All David knew was that a stranger had saved his wife's life, and he would spend the rest of his days trying to figure out how to repay that impossible debt. 3 weeks had passed since the mysterious stranger had saved Lisa's life. The surgery had been a complete success, and Lisa was already taking her first steps with the help of physical therapy. Every morning, David would help her with her exercises, and every evening, they would sit together talking about their future with a gratitude that ran deeper than words. But David couldn't stop thinking about Robert Mitchell. He had returned to the park every day, hoping to find the homeless man who had given him $50,000. He had visited every shelter, every soup kitchen, every place where homeless people gathered in the city. Nobody had seen Robert Mitchell, and nobody had ever heard of him. David had even tried searching online, but Robert Mitchell was such a common name that thousands of results came up, none of them matching the weathered man who had saved his wife's life. The guilt was eating at him. While Lisa was recovering and they were slowly getting back on their feet, Robert was somewhere out there, probably hungry and cold, having given away what might have been his entire life savings to help a stranger. On a Thursday morning, David's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Is this David Rivera? The voice was professional, crisp. Yes, this is David. My name is Catherine Brooks. I'm calling from Mitchell Construction Empire. We understand you're a construction foreman with 8 years of experience. David's heart skipped. Mitchell. Could it be connected to Robert Mitchell somehow? Yes, that's correct. Though I'm currently unemployed. We'd like to offer you an interview for a position as Regional Construction Manager. It's a significant step up from foreman, with a starting salary of $120,000 annually, plus benefits and company vehicle. David nearly dropped the phone. $120,000 was more than double what he had been making with Frank Morrison. I'm sorry, but how did you get my name? I haven't applied for any positions with your company. You come highly recommended. Can you be at our headquarters tomorrow at 10 a.m.? The address is 1247 Corporate Plaza, top floor. David accepted immediately, though he couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too convenient. Mitchell Construction Empire was one of the biggest construction companies in the state. Why would they want to hire him, especially when he had been fired from his last job? The next morning, David put on his only suit and drove to Corporate Plaza. The building was a gleaming 40-story tower of glass and steel, the kind of place where David had never imagined working. The lobby was all marble and gold fixtures, with a massive chandelier hanging from the ceiling. The elevator took him to the 40th floor, where the executive offices were located. The receptionist, a professional woman in her 30s, smiled warmly as he approached. David Rivera? Mr. Mitchell is waiting for you in his office. David's pulse quickened. Mitchell. It had to be a coincidence, but the name sent a chill down his spine. The receptionist led him down a hallway lined with awards and photographs of massive construction projects. At the end of the hall was a set of double doors with a nameplate that read, Robert Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer. David stopped dead in his tracks. Robert Mitchell, the same name as the homeless man who had saved Lisa's life. The receptionist knocked and opened the door. Mr. Rivera to see you, sir. Send him in. David stepped into the office and his world turned upside down. Behind an enormous mahogany desk sat the same man who had given him $50,000 in the park 3 weeks ago. But this version of Robert Mitchell was completely transformed. Gone were the dirty clothes and matted hair. This Robert Mitchell wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than David made in a month. His gray hair was neatly styled, and he looked every inch the powerful businessman he clearly was. The office was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Hello, David, Robert said, standing up with a slight smile. Please sit down. David remained frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. You're Robert Mitchell, the CEO. I am. But you were. In the park, you looked like a homeless man who had been drinking all day. Robert's smile was sad. I was. That day, I was exactly what I appeared to be. David slowly walked to the chair across from Robert's desk and sat down. I don't understand. Robert moved to a bar cart in the corner of his office and poured 2 glasses of water. He handed one to David and sat back down. 3 weeks ago was my son's birthday. Tommy would have been 28. He died 3 months ago from a heroin overdose. Robert's voice was steady, but David could see the pain in his eyes. I found him in an alley 6 blocks from here. He had been dead for hours. I'm so sorry. Tommy was everything to me. After his mother died when he was 12, it was just the 2 of us. I built this company for him, worked 18-hour days to give him everything I never had. But somewhere along the way, I lost him. The money, the success, none of it mattered when I was holding his body in that alley. Robert took a sip of water and continued. On his birthday, I couldn't handle being in this office, surrounded by all the things that I had chosen over spending time with my son. So I put on old clothes, grabbed a bottle of whiskey, and went to walk the streets where Tommy used to buy his drugs. I wanted to understand his world, to feel what he felt. David was beginning to understand. You weren't really homeless. No, but I felt more lost than any homeless person I had ever seen. I was walking around, drinking, trying to figure out how to live with the guilt of losing my son, when I saw you in that park. And you decided to help me. Robert shook his head. I decided to help myself. You see, David, I had been asking God, the universe, anyone who would listen, to give me a sign that life was still worth living. Then I saw you, crying over your wife, willing to sell your wedding ring to save the woman you loved. And I realized that some people still believed in love, in fighting for each other. Robert stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. That $50,000 wasn't my life savings, David. It was the cash I keep in my office safe for emergencies. But giving it to you was the first thing that had made me feel human since Tommy died. David felt a mix of relief and amazement. So you're not broke. You're not living on the streets. No, I'm worth about $1.8 billion. This company employs over 15,000 people across 6 states. The number was so large that David couldn't really comprehend it. Then why are you offering me a job? You could hire anyone. Robert turned back to face him. Because you're the kind of man who would give his wedding ring to save his wife. Because you cried real tears for someone other than yourself. Because in a world full of people who only care about money and success, you still believe in love. David was quiet for a moment, processing everything. What about Frank Morrison? My old boss. Robert's expression darkened. Frank Morrison has been stealing from my company for 2 years. Materials, equipment, even falsifying invoices for work that was never completed. We've been building a case against him. You knew he was stealing from you? We suspected, but we needed proof. The Hartwell project that he fired you from? That was one of our projects. Frank was supposed to be using our materials and our specifications, but he was cutting corners and pocketing the difference. David felt a chill. The day he fired me, he said the project was behind schedule because I left. The project was behind schedule because Frank was using substandard materials and half the crew he was supposed to have. We had investigators on site the day you left. That's how we knew Frank had fired you. Robert walked back to his desk and pulled out a folder. Frank Morrison was arrested yesterday morning. Fraud, embezzlement, theft. He's looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. What about his family? His wife filed for divorce and took the kids. His house is being seized to pay restitution. His nephew Jake, the one who hit your truck while driving drunk? He was driving one of Frank's company vehicles that was purchased with stolen money. Jake is facing charges too. David felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Frank had ruined his life, but seeing anyone lose everything felt hollow after what David had been through. There's more, Robert continued. Your landlord, Patterson, who served you with eviction papers. His building was financed through Morrison Financial, which is Frank's brother's company. They were laundering money through fake construction loans. Patterson is losing his building, and all his tenants are being relocated to better housing at no cost. David shook his head in amazement. It's like everyone who hurt me that day is facing consequences. Sometimes the universe has a way of balancing things out. But the most important thing is that your wife is walking again, and you have a chance to build the life you deserve. Robert handed David a contract. This is a 5-year employment agreement. Regional construction manager, overseeing projects in 3 states. The salary is $120,000 to start, with performance bonuses that could double that. Full health insurance, company car, and a housing allowance. David looked at the contract, hardly believing what he was seeing. This is more than I ever dreamed of. You've earned it. But there's one condition. David looked up nervously. What's that? I want you to promise me something. If you ever see someone in the position you were in 3 weeks ago, someone who needs help and has nowhere to turn, I want you to remember what it felt like to be saved by a stranger. David nodded. I promise. Robert smiled, and for the first time since David had met him, it was a genuine, happy smile. Then welcome to Mitchell Construction Empire, David Rivera. As David signed a contract, he thought about the chain of events that had brought him to this moment. Frank Morrison's greed had led to his downfall. The drunk driver who had destroyed David's truck had been caught in the web of Frank's crimes. The landlord who had evicted David was losing everything because of his connection to Frank's money laundering scheme. But most importantly, a billionaire CEO who had lost his son had found a reason to keep living by saving a stranger's wife. David looked up at Robert Mitchell, no longer seeing the homeless man from the park or the intimidating CEO, but simply a father who had lost his child and had chosen to honor that loss by saving someone else's family. Thank you, David said. For everything. Thank you, Robert replied. For reminding me that there are still people worth saving in this world. 6 months later, David Rivera was overseeing the construction of a new children's hospital. Lisa had made a full recovery and was back to work as a teacher. They had moved into a beautiful home in a safe neighborhood, and David's new salary had allowed them to start planning for the family they had always wanted. Frank Morrison was serving 18 years in federal prison. His nephew Jake had lost his license and was working at a gas station to pay off his legal fees. Patterson, the landlord, was living in a small apartment, working as a night security guard. And Robert Mitchell had found a new purpose in life. Every month, he would disappear for a day, putting on old clothes and walking the streets where his son had died. But now, instead of drinking and wallowing in grief, he would look for people who needed help. People like David Rivera, who had good hearts but had run out of options. Sometimes, Robert would joke with David. The universe had a funny way of putting the right people in the right place at exactly the right time. A homeless billionaire and a desperate construction worker, meeting on a park bench when both of their worlds had fallen apart. It was the kind of story that reminded David that even in the darkest moments, when everything seems lost, there might be a stranger sitting on a nearby bench who has exactly what you need to change your life forever.